Hi everybody and welcome back to my little YouTube channel. If you're new to this channel, my name's Amanda. I'm a diagnosed autistic adult and I was diagnosed a few years ago. In today's video, I want to discuss autism and employment. It's something that's really affected me over the last few years. And I'm sure if you're an autistic adult struggling to get a job or flipping from job to job and struggling to maintain an employment position, you can relate. So let's get into it. So the world of employment can be a real unpredictable environment, and things can change, or we can be expected to change and adapt to different situations straight away and immediately, and that can be really difficult for autistic people. Not to mention the socialising and being in groups and team scenarios at team meetings and social outings, and expected to make verbal and non-verbal communication, body language and understanding other people's thoughts, feelings and emotions can be incredibly stressful and overwhelming to us, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more in this video. We're having to try and mask a lot of the time, especially autistic females. We have to try and put an act on to fit into a neurotypical world. And I've said it in some of my other videos, we often feel like that little piece of a jigsaw puzzle that just doesn't quite fit. And so the world can feel incredibly stressful to us. And so going through the job interview process and even acquiring a job position, we can often feel incredibly anxious that other people, colleagues and managers, employers and customers and clients and everybody around us might just misunderstand us. And that leads to even more anxiety and stress. And so that's one of the main barriers, I think, for most of us. You might be different, everybody with autism is different, but being misunderstood, I think, is a big one up there for autistic people. And let's not forget the job interview process itself and the barriers that we face when we go for an interview. That's before we've even acquired a job position. So when people call us up for an interview, it's that pre-anxiety and stress of us worrying and panicking around the socialising and the questions that are going to be asked of us, and whether we're going to fit in, whether we're going to have panic attacks and anxiety. Am I going to burst into a massive sweating panic attack during the job interview process? And are people going to look at me like there's something a little bit different or wrong about me? Do I tell my potential employer that I'm autistic or that I'm suffering from anxiety? And a lot of autistic people, we are often sort of not likely to discuss our autism or anxiety or depression with our potential future employers for fear of discrimination, because we feel that they might choose somebody that's gone for the interview that doesn't have these conditions. And so that can make us feel even more stressed because we're having to mask and hide these feelings. And so these can be significant barriers to us obtaining a job in the first place. Another common problem that autistic people face during the job interview process is the questions that are asked of us during that interview. A lot of interview questions are tailored to non-autistic people, so what we call neurotypical people, those people that don't have autism. And so sometimes we can worry that the questions that are being asked to us we might not understand, or we might misunderstand, or we might take that little bit longer to reply because of our language and communication processing delays. And so it can be incredibly stressful if, for example, our potential employer asks us a question, our interviewer asks us a question, and then we give them the silent treatment for 30 seconds because they might think that we're not involved in the communication process, or we're just simply ignoring them, when we're not. We're just processing that question. We have this delay in communication. So sometimes it can be beneficial telling employers that we're autistic, but if you've got that anxiety, like I've just said, about informing potential employers of your autism, it can come across like we're just not engaged in that interview process. And then of course, if we do misunderstand a particular question that's being asked of us, we might worry about asking for clarification. So we might just feel a little bit anxious about saying, can you rephrase that question? Or, I'm really sorry, I don't understand what you mean by that, for fear of the interviewer thinking that there's something wrong with us or that we're just not right for the particular position. So having that communication barrier, that difficulty with interpreting what people are saying to us, the delay in giving responses back, and not wanting to ask for clarification can lead to significant stress during the interview process. Oftentimes, job interviews focus predominantly on communication skills, especially in places where you're expected to work with patients and clients, for instance. And they focus on whether you can maintain eye contact, whether you respond to verbal questions, whether you're good at understanding social nuances and sarcasm, and all of these things, the eye contact, the non-verbal communication and the verbal communication form part of the interview process. And oftentimes during face-to-face interviews, these are the things that employers look for in a potential employee. And those things can be really difficult for autistic people because we often don't get the social nuances side of it. So if somebody tells us a joke or says a joke to us, oftentimes a lot of autistic women, myself in particular, I might laugh but I won't understand it. But there are many autistic people that struggle even with masking, that's hiding our autistic traits. And so if a potential employer says something to us that we're expected to laugh at in response, we might not understand that we're supposed to be laughing in that situation, and it can come across like there's something a little bit odd about us, and that can deselect us from the job process. And then talking about social nuances, what I've just discussed, that's if somebody tells us a joke, for example, having to laugh in that situation, understanding if somebody's being sarcastic and understanding that they might not be being serious. And autistic people often feel like people are often very serious when sometimes they might just be joking or being sarcastic to us, for instance. That can be really difficult. And so the whole process of communicating with other people, especially an autistic person with a neurotypical person, and then add on to that an autistic person with a neurotypical person that maybe doesn't understand or they haven't had the training, maybe not their own fault, it's just that maybe they're not autism aware, it can be really challenging and anxiety provoking to us. Eye contact is a big one up there for me. So although as an autistic female I've learned to do something called autistic camouflaging or autistic masking, that means blending into our surroundings purposefully and intentionally in order to come across to other people like we don't have autism, like we're neurotypical, so that hopefully we can make friends, we can acquire a job, we can maintain a job, we can get promotions, we can get boyfriends, girlfriends, partners, we can get married and stay in relationships and have children. We put on this autistic masking, this autistic camouflaging. It can be incredibly difficult for a lot of autistic people to camouflage their traits, and even though I do camouflage, I find eye contact incredibly difficult. I will do it, and I've learned over time to try and maintain eye contact. Sometimes I can do this for a longer period of time, other times it can be incredibly difficult. And if I'm particularly anxious during a situation, a one-to-one or a social situation, I find that I can't maintain eye contact for long periods of time, and I have to look and then look away and look away because it's incredibly stressful. And while I'm maintaining eye contact with somebody, I can't process what's being said to me. So you can imagine during a job interview, if I was already feeling incredibly stressed, which I would be, I'd be extremely anxious in that situation. I wouldn't be able to maintain eye contact with the interviewer, and I'd keep looking down, or I might just look down all the time. And part of that non-verbal communication, which is body language, where you're expected to maintain eye contact, it comes across to the interviewer like we're not a team player and we are unable to communicate effectively in a group scenario. or a one-to-one scenario. So they might think that we can't communicate therefore with clients or patients or other people, and we're not going to be effective in that employment role, and it can go against us tremendously. Sometimes we can be really highly skilled in our subject area, say for example forensics or computer skills, IT skills, but because we're not able to understand the social communication side of it, the eye contact, the verbal and non-verbal, it can really go against us. Autistic people can really struggle to understand the thoughts, feelings and emotions of others. It's one that really does affect me. Although coming back to masking, I will fake my way through life. So if somebody's fallen, for example, and they're hurt on the floor, or if somebody's crying to me and they're upset and they're depressed or something's happened, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I don't understand that emotion. That sadness doesn't come naturally to me. Although it does, I do feel sadness, and oftentimes I can probably feel sadness or happiness more than maybe somebody that doesn't have autism. Dealing with that situation in a social environment when it happens spontaneously, and I'm expected to comfort somebody when they're sad or comfort somebody when they're hurt, is not something that comes naturally to me. It's something that's a learned thing. So although people have often said to me, "You're so bubbly, Amanda," or "You're the life and soul of the party," although I don't go to parties, but it's just a saying, coming back to social nuances and sayings, "You're the life and soul of the party," or "You're a breath of fresh air," meaning you're a happy person and you make me feel better, or you would make a wonderful nurse. Somebody said that to me recently. Although I do work in healthcare, you'd make a wonderful nurse. These feelings don't come naturally to me, they're learned, so I'm actually faking it. You've probably heard the saying, fake it till you make it, and that's usually what autistic people do. So you can imagine during job interviews and in jobs where we're having to mask or fake our feelings and emotions on a day in, day out basis can be really difficult and draining for autistic people. Autistic people, myself included, we love routine and ritual, and we hate when routines and rituals change. I really hate it. I like to have my days pre-planned out in advance, so from the morning when I wake up to night when I go to bed, and oftentimes weeks, months, years in advance, I'll pre-plan. And if somebody changes that routine or ritual, it won't end well. As in, I'll either get upset. It's not, I mean, sometimes I do cry. That's not part of my meltdown process. It's part of what's known as the rumbling stage, the pre-meltdown. But my meltdown will be withdrawing and cutting people off completely. I will block people on my phone and text messages, and I just won't respond back. And a lot of autistic people, we do two things. We either have massive meltdowns where we get really emotional and start crying, or we withdraw and give people a silent treatment. And that happens if routine changes. For example, my dad had a birthday a few years ago, and I had it all pre-planned months and months in advance, and my uncle toddled along and he changed the plans at the last minute, and it just did not end well for any of my family because I just didn't turn up. I thought it was, one, incredibly rude, as I'd organised it and paid for everything in advance, and two, I just hated, more so number two, I hated the change. And ever since then I've not spoken to my uncle, and it's been years. We can really hold grudges for things like that. I really do. That's for another video, but autistic people can hold long-term grudges, and I certainly do. So I cut everybody off. So you can imagine that is just somebody's birthday. In an employment scenario where things might change at the last minute, your employer might ask you to go somewhere or do something. It's happened to me before, where I worked in the NHS for nearly 20 years, and my employer changed my timetable at the last minute, and I was expected to go on a home visit, and it wasn't pre-planned, so it was completely out of my comfort zone. And I kicked off a little bit, but not kicked off physically, I kicked off verbally by saying no, and basically walked out and went home in that situation. And everybody looked at me like there was something wrong with me. I got referred to occupational health, and it all kicked off in my career, and it was all pretty much a downhill spiral after that, because I was seen as this bad person because I was misunderstood that I'm autistic. But that's just the scenario that I'm trying to explain. when we are in an employment setting, employers expect us to be able to adapt to sudden changes in routine and ritual. That's something that's really difficult for us as autistic people. A lot of autistic people, we don't just have autism, we have other co-concurring conditions. So we might have anxiety, or we might have depression, or we might have different health conditions like chronic pain, for example, that goes alongside anxiety. There's a fine line, there's a health study that shows there's a massive correlation between the feelings of prolonged anxiety, which autistic people feel, and chronic pain. And it's something that I suffer with terribly, chronic pain. So a lot of the times we have these co-concurrent conditions, and sometimes it can be really difficult for us to not only tell our prospective employers that we have autism or anxiety, but also telling them that we have chronic pain conditions, because we feel like they might not put reasonable adjustments in for us, or they might favour somebody that doesn't have these disabilities instead of us. And so it can be really anxiety provoking for us, and it can put a lot of us off even going to the interview. And then adding on to that, trying to get the courage up to inform your prospective employer that you're autistic, it can cause a real fear, because again we can be worried that we might be discriminated against and we might not get the job interview, or we might not get the job position and they might give it to somebody else. It can be incredibly difficult for autistic people to learn new skills in life. Sometimes it can be incredibly challenging for us just maintaining our current skills. For example, remembering to brush our teeth. A lot of the time, autistic people might have to put sticky notes up on the fridge or on the bathroom mirror, for example, to say brush your teeth. And we might just need prompting. I know I do. For a lot of things I need prompting, and just learning and maintaining skills can be incredibly difficult, especially if we're feeling anxious. And you can imagine that's just basic life skills. You can imagine in an employment situation where we're constantly being drip fed information, how to do our jobs correctly, what to do in this situation, what to do in this scenario, how to complete that paperwork, how to do this, that and the other. It can be incredibly stressful, because it can sometimes feel like there's just too much going on and we just need one thing at a time. And sometimes if we're expected to do too many things at once, it can lead to massive anxiety, a massive amount of overwhelm and lots of meltdowns. And let's not forget hazard awareness. I am particularly clumsy. I've got a cut on my finger. I had to go to hospital the other day. I thought I might need stitches. Luckily I didn't. They dressed it and put the steri strips on. But we can cut ourselves easily, and we can fall and trip and injure ourselves due to motor clumsiness. Motor meaning the way our muscles move, the way our arms and legs and body moves. It's called biomechanics. The way our body moves in time can be different to people that don't have autism, and it can lead to a lot of what we call clumsiness. So you can just imagine in a work situation, we're expected to have a certain degree of hazard awareness, and sometimes autistic people struggle so much with that, and so we can break things and drop things and even injure ourselves. And over time that can accumulate occupational health appointments, and it might lead to unfortunate disciplinary sanctions. A lot of autistic people really fear rejection. I'm one of them. I'm really reserved because I'm worried that I'm going to be rejected by other people or in social situations. So I tend to protect myself by isolating myself from the world around me, and I worry about everything and ruminate that I'm going to be rejected. So I think one of the big fears up there with regards to job interviews and autism is that we're going to be rejected. And a lot of autistic people are worried and concerned about asking for reasonable adjustments. Fear of potentially asking for certain reasonable adjustments to be put in place is one of the big ones up there in terms of employment. And then a lot of autistic people fear the consequences of informing their manager or their colleagues that they have autism or ADHD or anxiety or depression, because they worry about the consequences of informing them, such as bullying and harassment, and that can be a real thing for autistic people, unfortunately, in employment. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you have, don't forget to hit like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you for my next vlog. Cheerio!